Sure, would be that. Would be good. Go to it, because we just-
All right, we're gonna get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian here. And I always get the privilege of introducing Ron, who I feel is like a McFarland an icon. Thank you. And we always love hearing what he has to share about this community and the love that he has for this place. And I think that's very evident in all he speaks for us. So I'm going to pass it on to Ron. For those of you who also are just lovers of history in general, we have another program next Wednesday about Wisconsin POW camps. We're branching out in the Oregon Area Historical Society and a gentleman. So feel free to come and learn a little bit more about another history next week. But tonight it's about Ron and it's about Conrad. So Ron, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for coming on such a beautiful evening. I appreciate you spending the time here with me rather than having a glass of wine in your patio, but that's a good idea. But anyway, tonight's talk is on Conrad Elvehjem, our famous native son of McFarland. And I was thinking to myself, I'm surprised I haven't had a talk on Conrad Elvehjem before, because he is McFarland's most famous native son. No one else comes close to Conrad Elvehjem and what he had done in his career and his life. Just a world-renowned scientist and researcher, changed the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world with his scientific discoveries and vitamin nutrition research. And he was a well-loved and respected university administrator and a very common and modest and humble person. But the name Conrad Elvehjem lately in the last 5 or 6 years has verses that have centered around him. So I thought, well, this is a good time then to talk about Conrad Elvehjem. And I happen to be on a committee that has been tasked to think of ways to honor Conrad Elvehjem since the school changed its name. And so I thought, what better way to honor Conrad Elvehjem than to talk about him tonight. So, as I said, his name has been like a lightning rod, and there have been some controversies. The biggest one is the Nakoma Racial Covenant that has his signature on it from 1931, and then there were 2 other cases when he was UW president involving Black students and their racial protests in 1960, and then this housing discrimination film in 1962. And so, Elvehjem signature on the covenant, and I'll discuss that a little bit later when we get to that. But because the McFarland School Board changed the name, they had an advisory committee to look into Conrad Elvehjem's life, and I supplied the advisory committee with a lot of information on Conrad Elvehjem. There were 2 or 3 other people who supplied information on Conrad Elvehjem, so I just want to get that out there early, that I had been involved in gathering material for this advisory committee. These controversies created a great deal of fallout. And you can look at all of the things that have been said about Conrad Elvehjem in the last several years because basically of this racial covenant that his signature is on. And up in the upper left corner, it's from Stuart Levitan, who wrote a book on the history of Madison, the Sesquicentennial History of Madison. And it says that Elvehjem publicly supported a restrictive covenant barring Blacks from living in Nakoma. And the key phrase there is publicly supported. And so when you read that, you're thinking Conrad was out there promoting it. writing letters to the editor, talking about it at, with speeches or whatnot. But that wasn't the case. He did not do that. Stuart Levitan kind of walked that back about a year ago, saying, well, when he said publicly supported it, he meant he signed his name on this covenant, and it was filed at the Register of Deeds office, which became a public document that probably no one ever saw, because it was just a two-page document that no one else was going to be concerned about. And so when he says publicly supported, it's misleading. And so a student from McFarland did a paper a few years ago, and she grabbed onto that. And on the bottom right, she said, Elvehjem continued to publicly fund racially restricted covenants. But I've been doing research on Conrad Elvehjem for see any other evidence to support that Conrad Elvehjem publicly supported or raised funds for restricted covenants. But now I'll just go on and talk about Conrad Elvehjem's life. But as I do that, kind of think about these comments that are up here as I go through his life. And so just some background on Elvehjem. He was born on May 27th, 1901 in the town of Dunn. It's a farmhouse. The farmhouse now is in the village of McFarland because of growth and annexation. And his parents were Ole and Christine. He had two older brothers, Oswald and Elmer, and an older sister, Lydia. And the farm was just east of the village of McFarland, or at that time it wasn't even a village, but of the center of McFarland. So you can see the Elvehjem farm on the map, Elvehjem, and this is Creamery Road coming from McFarland, and it turns here and turns into Elvehjem Road to Highway AB. And so the Elvehjem farm was here, but it also was across the railroad tracks. That's some acreage over there. And it was also across Elvehjem Road at 35 acres. And this is about where the dog park is now. And over here is, Country Wood and Scotland Village. So the Elvehjems had that farmland. So the road literally went through the Elvehjem farm. There are two barns on the south side of Elvehjem Road, and the house and some other outbuildings were on the north side of Elvehjem Road. And so because it went through the farm, people in McFarland and the area called it Elvehjem Road. And the railroad tracks went right through the farm as well. His parents immigrated to the U.S. from Norway as children. Ole was born in 1852 in the Stedja parish in Sogndal, in the Sogn and Fjordane county. And Ole's family worked on a small farm a short distance from Sogndal. Sogndal is right here. There's a fjord that goes up to it, and so the Elvehjem farm was about up here. And his father or his grandparents probably didn't own the land. They were laborers. And like so many Norwegians, if they were laborers, they didn't have a chance to have any land or grow in their life, so they immigrated. But the Elvehjem farm was called Elvehjem. That was in Norway. Farms were identified by their location. And so Elvehjem is Elve. It's two Norwegian words. Elve means river and Hjem means home. So Elvehjem means river home. And Christina was born in 1860 in the Dala parish near Luster in the same county. And she was from a farm called Hangesteg. And that was right about there. So they were somewhat close, but they didn't know each other as children. And they immigrated with their parents to the McFarland area. So Conrad grew up on the farm, and Ole, the father, expected everyone to Conrad grew up learning to be a hard worker, and this is where he developed the core principle that believing you should accomplish something every day of your life. And he was milking the cows, he was in the fields planting and harvesting, and he was a skinny little boy, they say, but he became the fastest and the best cow milker in the family and the neighborhood. And he was always curious. Living on the farm stimulated his curiosity. He was fascinated by the little seeds that they would plant and what would come out of them. It always got him in trouble, or often got him in trouble as well. He would do experiments in the house, and sometimes it required fire or some sort of heat. And the experiments sometimes backfired, and once he burned a few holes in the carpet. But his mother didn't get angry, and she said later that Conrad was seldom a naughty boy, but always curious. And when Conrad was a scientist, the 13-year-old boy asked him what motivated him to be a biochemist, or choose biochemistry as a career. And Conrad answered saying, as a youngster, I was interested in what made plants grow and develop. I was very intrigued by the rapid growth of the corn plant, and I was interested in what reactions took place within the plant to allow such rapid growth. And later, his wife was quoted as saying that Conrad considered curiosity as an essential attribute of any scientist. And as far as outdoor work and farm chores, Conrad enjoyed it even as an adult. And in an interview, Mrs. Elvehjem said, well, his own yard work. And he would go down to the farm, his brother's farm, especially during the war when it was hard to get help, and strip tobacco and pitch hay and that sort of thing. And they always told him he was the fastest tobacco stripper in the area down there. So when he came, the last time they said, oh, well, you're just so city folk, you won't be able to do this. And he said, oh, I think I will. And then he had the children go down with him, and they helped plant tobacco and pick strawberries and do the things on the farm. We often went to the farm almost once a week. And Conrad went to school in McFarland, but not where we think the schools are these days. There was the first schoolhouse in McFarland was across where the McFarland Lutheran Church was located. And during Conrad's time, the school was expanded to, they added another classroom. But there were, at the first start of it, Conrad had there were two classrooms. And so Conrad was in like first, second, third, and fourth. And then the other classroom had, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth, something like classes. And so there were fewer in each classroom. When Conrad went to school, it was the first time he started speaking English. He spoke Norwegian for the first 6 years of his life. And even as an adult, he didn't speak Norwegian, but he had a slight Norwegian accent. And he had trouble pronouncing a lot of the English words, especially the THs. Most Norwegians have trouble pronouncing THs for some reason. And one year when Conrad was at the school, he wrote a paper, and the story was on Stephen Babcock's test for butterfat content in milk. And that turned out to be quite the prophetic paper that he wrote. And we'll find out about that later. And Conrad was quite smart, and he possessed a keen sense of intellect. And according to Mrs. Elvehjem, he had won everything scholastically from the time he was in first grade. And also his innate curiosity helped him in school. And the pictures here, Conrad's in the back. Just see the top of his face against the chalkboard. And in this one, he's right there. Some of these pictures that I have of Conrad are from his family that they were happy to send me. He went to the McFarland Norwegian Lutheran Church, and And quite often the services were Norwegian at that time, but English was being used more and more as Conrad was growing up. And his confirmation classes were probably in English. And that's his confirmation class. And Conrad's right back up here in the middle of these three boys. And can anybody tell me who this guy is next to Conrad? Some of you McFarland veterans. Nope. It's Con Thompson, and who was a longtime hometown baseball manager and the owner of the gas station on Broadhead Street. That's Brant. And so Conrad was confirmed in 1916. More school days. He graduated from McFarland in 1916. He was finishing ninth grade, and that's as far as McFarland would go in those days. And Conrad is on the far left. Con Thompson there again. To continue high school, but then some who lived on a farm wouldn't go to school anymore. They would just stay home and work on the farm, and that was their life. But Ole, the father, was a frugal, successful farmer, and he demanded hard work from all of the members of his family. But he also insisted that they all get a good education as well as help on the farm. But Conrad's father was supportive of education, but it was his mother that inspired their children to value education. And Conrad saw his two brothers go to college before him. Elmer graduated from the University of Wisconsin, and Oswald graduated from Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. Lydia didn't go to college, but after graduating from Stoughton High School in 1908, she started teaching for several years in the McFarland and Bloom Grove schools. In those days, you didn't need a college education to be a teacher. And all the Elvehjem children went to Stoughton High School after graduating from McFarland's ninth grade. And Conrad's three siblings rented a room in Stoughton when they were in high school, but Conrad didn't want to do that. He was a homebody, and he wanted to stay at home. And so he thought he would commute to Stoughton, but the trouble is he didn't have a car in those days, so he hopped the freight train from McFarland and took that to high school every day and somehow all the way back. And I saw one reference to this fact, and I couldn't verify it, so I don't know if it's true. I saw that I read where his parents bought him a hand car where he could pump his way to Stoughton. And I don't know how that would work, not knowing the schedule of the trains and how hard it would be to pump all the way to Stoughton all through all weather, but maybe that's what he did. But he would also jump the freight train. But in 1916, his parents retired from farming and moved to town, and they had a house built on Exchange Street. And so at that time, when Conrad graduated from ninth grade, he was on Exchange Street. And he was there for those 3 years. But I'm guessing he also stayed with his brother Elmer on the farm to help out now and then. I'm sure Elmer could use the help. And so I always pictured Conrad running through the fields to catch the train and jumping it there. But he probably from Exchange Street just walked down to the depot and jumped on the train at that place. From Stoughton in 1919, and in the yearbook, everybody had this motto, a unique motto just for them, and Conrad's classmates came up with this motto for him: manly and bearing, honest and true, the world has need of men like you. And so that was. And after his death in 1962, Stoughton High School listed Conrad Elvehjem as their most famous graduate. And I have no idea what Eric is, if it was his nickname. I saw no other reference to that but it was in his yearbook.
What are the numbers behind it?
The year, so the 3 would be his junior year, 4 would be his senior year.
What's that first one?
I don't know what club that is. Maybe you should. Yeah. Light. Light? Oh, I really don't know what that is. Yeah. And so right away after graduation, that next fall, he went to the University of Wisconsin, and he started and studied under Harry Steenbach and E.B. Hart. E.B. Hart was the head of the agricultural chemistry department at the UW at that time, and Steenbach was one of the first professors that Conrad had. And Steenbach was actually a student of E.B. Hart when Steenbach started, and those two did a lot of discovery together. And their big discovery, Steenbach and Hart, was on figuring out how to cure someone's goiter. And they discovered that people with goiters didn't have enough iodine in their diet. And people on either coast didn't have goiters because they ate more fish, and there's iodine in fish. So they figured this out. E. Hart was thinking of how can we get people to get enough iodine in their diet? And he came, and they'd have to eat it, often, every day or whatnot. And so E.B. Hart came up with the idea of iodine and salt. And so next time you're at the store and you pick up Morton's salt that's been iodized, you can thank E.B. Hart, and you don't have a goiter. For a science degree in 1923, focusing on biochemistry. In those days, they called it ag chemistry. And he began work the day after his commencement exercises in the lab, starting, just doing basic work. And he was accepted into the graduate program, and he was offered a teaching assistantship under E.B. Hart for the 1923-24 school year. And that's when he got his master's. And his master's research focused on nutritional anemia and the role of copper and iron in the formation of hemoglobin. And I know there's a reason why I didn't become a scientist, because none of that makes sense to me. The Sigma fraternity, a national agricultural organization, and he lived in the fraternity house on campus called the farmhouse, because most of the members of that fraternity were members of in the College of Agriculture. And that was located on Mill Street. It's just a short walk to the ag chemistry building. And just to give you a sense of the type of person Elvehjem was, it was said in one of his biographies that he was seldom ill and extremely punctual for appointments and getting to work on time. He had little patience for those who dwell on the past. He was a relatively sensitive soul and basically a shy individual. He was always self-assured, possessing a particularly positive attitude about life. When he set out to do something, he did it. His roommate was dating a girl who lived just around the corner from the farmhouse. And that couple thought it was really funny that their respective roommates were both named Connie. And they thought they should go on a blind date. And so they set them up. And their first date was seeing a movie at the Old Strand Theater on the square. And, started graduate school, and Connie was a freshman, so she had just started school. But the first date went pretty well, so they had a second date. And their next date was the homecoming dance. And afterwards, as they were walking back to her place, Conrad admitted to Connie that he had never danced before. And she told him that she had already figured that out. Despite his inauspicious start at dancing, Mrs. Elvehjem later said that Conrad became an excellent dancer, saying his tall and slender physique was perfect for dancing. And as a couple, later on, they belonged to 2 dance clubs. And after the homecoming dance, they were a steady pair for several years. And at the end of the 1925-26 school year, they were married. In a biographical memoir from the National Academy of Sciences, it was written, "This was a happy union, and the two Connies complemented each other. He was relatively quiet, while she bubbled with enthusiasm, meeting people easily with charm and grace. She was a source of strength to her husband throughout all stages of his career, especially when he held administrative positions." In a later interview, Mrs. Elvehjem offered this story during their first year of marriage. She said, in our first vacation, the first year we were married, we went down to the farm to take over while the brother and sister went on a trip. And that was certainly the hardest work I ever did. Washing separators and all this, oh boy, I really had it. And then the threshers came 2 days early, so we had to feed them. And the cistern went dry, and we had to walk down quite a ways to get water to wash the vegetables and everything. I really thought I had earned my vacation that year. I think my husband did too. I think he had it. He never wanted to go back to the farm to live and to make his living that way. So Conrad continued with his studies, and they lived on the second floor above a Runbaum's drugstore on University Avenue. And another short walk to the biochemistry building. And he would bring his fellow grad students to the apartment for coffee and donuts almost every morning for break. And he just loved that, having his colleagues around and just having a great time. And according to Merle Purdy, the author of the University of Wisconsin History, Conrad was modest and unassuming, shy to the point of often seeming cold and aloof on first meeting, but with a directness and work ethic inherited from his rural Norwegian ancestors. Conrad received his PhD in the summer of 1927, and his thesis was on the role of iron and copper in enzymes. And his research immediately made a difference. It helped farmers with their young pigs who were dying quite a bit, but his discovery made them all healthy. Conrad stayed on at the university after getting his doctorate, working as an instructor in the biochemistry department from 1927 to 1929. At the same time, he was doing major research with Hart, Steenbach, and James Waddell, demonstrating that copper is an essential nutrient for normal hemoglobin formation. Their findings stimulated further research involving nutrition and vitamins. In 1929, Elvehjem was awarded a full fellowship by the National Research Council, allowing him to study in Cambridge University in England for 1 year under the famed Sir Frederick Colin Hopkins, who has been called the father of the vitamin concept. While at Cambridge, Conrad continued to research in copper and iron in relation to nutrition. He was also introduced to a new apparatus called the Barcroft respirometer. Barcroft was a device for measuring the metabolic activity of small samples of tissue, allowing researchers to distinguish between the responses of normal tissue to deficient tissue in the study of respiratory enzymes. Again, I'm glad I was not a scientist. Returning to Wisconsin, Conrad received a letter from E.B. Hart saying, quote, "I understood today that the Board of Regents had passed the budget, which appoints you as an assistant professor at $3,000 for the academic year. You ought to be very happy over this because it was very difficult to get an increment of $600 for you in the present state of Wisconsin finances. You are young, and with summer pay and gradual increments and an opportunity for research, the position you will hold with us ought to be very attractive." And Conrad responded in a letter saying, "I was glad to have your letter and to learn that there will be a job waiting for me when I return. I can't say that I'm exceedingly happy over the salary, but we can talk about that later. What I am wondering about now is if you will buy a Barcroft for me. If we are going to continue work on the minor inorganic elements, it will come in very handy. In fact, there are thousands of things to do in regard to the catalytic action of copper before leaving it in favor of other elements. And Hart must have sent him money because Conrad came home with a Barcroft under his arms. And he was very protective of this instrument, and no one else could carry it or even touch it. It was in a crate. And this was the very first instrument of its kind in the United States. An adjacent laboratory that had once been Stephen Babcock's. In a later interview with Mrs. Elvehjem, she said Conrad said having Babcock's office meant quite a lot to him since Babcock was the pioneer in the UW in vitamin and nutrition research. In June 1931, Elvehjem joined others to celebrate Stephen Babcock. And there's a photo of him and Babcock, of course, the older gentleman in the front with a white beard. Elvehjem is in the back against that window on the left. And all of these people are scientists in the biochemistry department. And
Is that part on the right there? Lower right?
yes, that's Hart on the lower right. So they were just celebrating Babcock. And just a few weeks after this picture was taken, Babcock died in, I think, July. This time, Elvehjem was given his first doctoral student, Frederick John Stair. And over the years, Elvehjem served as research advisor to 89 doctoral students. And his first student, Fred Stair, became a noted nutritionist and founded and chaired the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health. Asked years later what kind of person Conrad Elvehjem was, Stair said, Connie usually had a smile, a nice sense of humor, and was a very caring person. In class, you could interrupt and ask a question. Out of class, his door was always open. He worked as hard as any of the students, and you'd usually find him in the lab on Saturday mornings. Another early doctoral student of Elvehjem's was Van Rensselaer Potter, who went on to have a long career as a researcher and professor of oncology at the McCardle Laboratory at the UW-Madison. Potter also coined the word bioethics in 1970. In 1938, Potter and Elvehjem developed a device that is used in preparing small tissue samples for pathological and biochemical studies. Their device, the Potter-Elvehjem tissue grinder, is still on the market and being used today. It'd be interesting to note what the other 87 doctoral students did with their careers, allowing us to see the wide-ranging impact that Elvehjem had on scientific research. When they moved to Tacoma, he and March or very early April, I can't really pin it down. And they had 27th, Conrad turned 30 years old, and then a few days later, they had their first child, a daughter named Peggy. And in 1931, sometime in June, he signed the Tacoma Homes Company document, which also had the little sentence of the racial covenant. And I can't tell exactly when he signed it, but I'm guessing it was in June. And I don't know for sure. We can't figure it out if he was at a meeting or if they were canvassing the neighborhood and then just knocked on the door for their signatures. But my guess is it was a door-to-door signature thing, because with let's say it was June 14th that they signed it, and we don't know because when they signed it they didn't have put dates down. But with a two-week-old at home, I doubt if they both went to the meeting. And both of them had signed the document. Document was the compliance with the covenant was mandatory. You didn't have to sign it. If you lived in that neighborhood, you had to go by what the document said. As long as the majority of the residents of that neighborhood signed it, that was the law for that neighborhood. The document that he and Mrs. Elvehjem signed, and it's hard to read. It's a copy off of microfilm from the Register of Deeds office, and so it's dark in certain areas. Over here, I've blown up the signatures of both Mrs. Elvehjem and Conrad Elvehjem. Just the racial covenant. There's a lot of legalese and realty jargon in this 2-page thing, and then so you're reading all of that, and there are 2 other amendments. One amendment here, one amendment here, talking about various properties that are whatever, and then very down here is the 3rd amendment saying no part of these premises shall ever be owned or occupied by any person of the Ethiopian race. And so he signed it, Mrs. Elvehjem signed it, but we don't know what their thinking was when they signed it. We don't know if he read it completely all the way down to that very last line, or if the Nakoma Homes representative was telling them what they were signing to make sure that they read it all, because when you're reading through legalese and realty jargon, you might get tired and just sign it, knowing that it didn't matter if you signed it or not. But anyway, this is the document that they signed. This is the document they signed, and this is the document, the signature that has caused the greatest deal of controversy. And if you think back to that 3rd slide I showed you with the people calling them racist and the white supremacists and evil and all of that, is due to his signing of this document. But when I was on this a year ago researching Elvehjem for the advisory committee and the school board, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to somebody in the Elvehjem family? And so I started researching, and I tracked down Elvehjem's grandson. And he didn't really know anything about his grandfather. He was born after Conrad died. And I was looking for if he knew any information about his grandfather's beliefs in race relations or anything like that. And he said, well, I don't know, but I'll talk to my mom. So Peggy, Conrad's daughter. And so the daughter wrote me back a letter. And so I just want to quickly read it, what she said. And she said, my dad strongly believed that all people, regardless of economic or social status, race or ethnicity, should have equal access to education. I understand that this included blacks. Sunday mornings, he would drop off my mom, brother, and me at church, and then go to the university lab to check on work being done by his students, and then rejoin us at church. He welcomed students from all around the world. And while I cannot confirm whether he had black students, I definitely recall that he had foreign students, including from India, among other countries. Our church wanted to build a home in Nakoma, where our family lived. Because they were black, the family was not allowed to build a home in Nakoma. My dad couldn't understand how this could happen, that a family would not be allowed to live based on the color of their skin. My dad was the type of person who would openly share his views that this racial bias was wrong, but he would not publicly draw attention to or complain about these situations. These are a few examples of childhood memories I have that show my dad's strong belief that people of all colors and backgrounds should have equal access to education and support for blacks in our community. And so this letter just shows the polar opposite of what people are thinking when they see his signature. And both have seen copies of the document, and they have received copies of this letter. this research. In the early 1930s, Elvehjem continued to work on trace minerals or microminerals such as copper. It was said that in the lab, Elvehjem was very skillful in coordinating experiments and cross-checking results, and its thoroughness and ability to combine information from various sources. Also at this time, he began a large program studying the vitamin B complex. It was this research that would ultimately lead to the discovery that would cure the disease pellagra. Pellagra was a disease caused by a lack of vitamin B or niacin. If left untreated, the disease would often result in death. And therefore, the disease is associated with the 4 Ds: diarrhea, dermatitis, which is a terrible skin rash, dementia, and then death. And the word comes from Italian pella, meaning rough, and agra, meaning skin. It was widespread in underdeveloped countries. The disease was first reported in the US in 1902, reaching epidemic proportions in the southern states in the early 20th century. Pellagra caused more deaths than any other nutritional disease in American history. The primary reason for contracting the disease was due to a deficiency in the diet of the person, and this was caused by poverty. It was discovered in the early 20th century by John Goldenberger that changing a person's diet cured pellagra, but they still didn't know what was the specific element responsible for this disease. And so a lot of the people who were living in the South and very poor were eating a lot of corn, untreated corn, and their diet was heavy in corn. And that's one of the main causes too of getting pellagra. And so enter Elvehjem and his research team, and one of the symptoms of a person afflicted with pellagra was a very enlarged, very red tongue. And knowing that dogs can also suffer from a disease called black tongue, Elvehjem's team started to experiment on dogs to see if they could isolate one nutritional factor that could cure the black tongue. In late summer of 1937, there was a breakthrough, and Elvehjem discovered that niacin was that key nutrient to cure black tongue and pellagra. And they just needed just a tiny bit of it, and they gave it to the dogs who were suffering. And the very next morning, when the researchers showed up, the dogs were as healthy as could be. It just took overnight to cure them. And the tedious and time-consuming research is described in December 1938 Collier's magazine. And so if anybody wants to read how Elvehjem's team figured this out, you find the December 1938 Collier's magazine, and you can read all about it. Conrad sent his exciting news of the discovery by telegram to a number of fellow biochemists around the country in late summer 1937. And by the end of the year, the discovery had been confirmed in dog experiments by 6 of the independent researchers. But before Elvehjem could publish a more complete paper and announce the pellagra cure, one of the independent researchers that Elvehjem sent the data to, Tom Spies, that confirmed that niacin cured human pellagra and published the findings ahead of Elvehjem. And because of that, Spies was named Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1938, a distinction that really should have gone to Conrad Elvehjem. And so here's a picture of a person suffering from pellagra. And the chart here shows the number of deaths occurring during those years, and the black solid lines in the graph are black female, and then the next highest are black males. And so, and poverty was a key element. That's why the blacks suffered the most from this disease. But Elvehjem's discovery didn't go completely unrewarded. Then Ressler Potter, the longtime cancer researcher at the UW and an early doctoral student of Elvehjem's, later stated that the discovery of niacin as the anti-pellagra agent was the biggest vitamin breakthrough of modern times. And Dr. Hector DeLuca, a longtime chair of the biochemistry department in later years and noted vitamin and nutrition researcher, said niacin was one of the most significant discoveries. For his accomplishment, Elvehjem received the Meade Johnson Award from the American Institute of Nutrition in 1939, and he was nominated for the 1939 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his niacin work. He was also nominated for the Nobel Prize 8 more times between 1940 and 1950 in chemistry and medicine. No other scientist on the UW campus received more Nobel Prize nominations than Elvehjem. From an Elvehjem biography written by Robert Burris, Carl Baumann, and Ben Rensselaer Potter, they say, subsequent to the spectacular conquest of pellagra, Elvehjem was invited to Cornell University Medical School to be interviewed for the chairmanship of the Department of Biochemistry, the only position outside of the University of Wisconsin he ever considered. A modest and humble man, Elvehjem had simple tastes and more than a touch of austerity. Potter recalls his dismay at entering their shared office one Saturday shortly after the Cornell trip to find Elvehjem on his hands and knees scrubbing the frayed maroon linoleum floor. More from their biography. It says, in the years just prior to the discovery of the anti-pellagra vitamin, and for many years thereafter, Elvehjem and Professor Perry Wilson conducted an enzyme seminar with their most interested students and colleagues. This bore fruit in the form of a manual on respiratory enzymes in which 16 local Wisconsin students and faculty described the state of the field in the period just prior to the date of publication in 1939. In 1945, Elvehjem attended the National Conference on Intercellular Enzymes of Normal and Malignant Tissues at Hershey, Pennsylvania. There, he and Potter, his former student, discussed the fact that opportunities for postdoctoral study in Europe that had proved so important for Wisconsin biochemists in the past would no longer be available to them in the immediate post-war years. The two hit on the idea of a postdoctoral training facility, and with support from the medical school, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, and from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Enzyme Institute became a reality. And Mrs. Elvehjem said in the later years that the Enzyme Institute was exciting to us because it was the first in the world. So we thought it was great. So just remember the Enzyme Institute, that'll be brought up a little bit later too. Good grief. I'm slipping away. I have to talk double time. This always happens. Elvehjem became full professor. In 1944, he was named the chair of the Department of Biochemistry, which was the largest academic biochemistry department in the country and the leading grantor of PhD degrees. In 1946, Elvehjem was named the dean of the UW Graduate School. He agreed to accept the appointment only if he could continue as the chair of the biochemistry department as well. And so he figured this problem out by focusing on the biochemistry department in the morning and doing his graduate school work in the afternoon. And besides his responsibilities as department chair and dean, Elvehjem continued to do active research, supervise graduate students, write papers, review articles. He co-authored nearly 800 papers, and that comes out to about 25 a year, which is absolutely amazing. And he continued to teach, serve on numerous councils and committees, as well as speak around the country on nutrition. And I have to add here that of all the speeches that Conrad gave, and I'm sure there are hundreds, and he wrote prefaces in books and whatnot, he never kept a penny of the honoraria that was given to him. Instead, he gave all of his earned money to the university, be placed in trust for scholarships. And during World War II, Elvehjem also had an office and a secretary in Washington, D.C., because he was working on military food rations and making sure that they were nutritionally balanced. And but when he was back on campus, he was always in the lab every day at 7:30 sharp. In 1952, Elvehjem received the Lasker Award in medical research, and this prestigious honor is often called America's Nobel Prize, and it's a highly significant predictor of future Nobel prizes. And according to David Nelson, a professor and emeritus professor at the UW Department of Biochemistry since 1971, Elvehjem would have gotten the Pulitzer had he not died in 1962. And if you're interested in hearing this talk by David Nelson, you can go on Google or YouTube and just search this discovery of niacin, the Madison biochemistry, David Nelson, Conrad Elvehjem, and you'll find it. It's about a 40-minute video. According to his short biography written by Burris, Bauman, and Potter, it says, a scientist at heart, Elvehjem early demonstrated his talents as an administrator, managing a large research staff. He grasped concepts with remarkable speed, marshaled evidence pertinent to the problem, and reached logical conclusions without delay. As one rather slow-spoken faculty member remarked, honey answers your problem before you have completed stating your question. This is not to say that his conclusions were snap judgments. They were consistently sound and were respected, considering his remarkable record for being right. He was also scrupulously honest in his dealings. Intrigue was foreign to him. He trusted his colleagues and they trusted him. On the assumption that he was dealing with reasonable people who were seeking solutions, he willingly used his remarkable perceptiveness and breadth of understanding to help formulate and implement those solutions. According to Mrs. Elvehjem, Conrad was a good administrator because he could explain clearly what he wanted done. And she added, and he was never afraid to delegate or to give the reins to someone else. You know, some people want to be the big boss and kind of keep it all in their hands, but he never had that feeling. And according to Merle Curdy's book, Elvehjem believed that a scientist's tough-minded training and logical reasoning were ideally suited for solving difficult administrative problems. And University of Wisconsin Regents thought he was a good administrator as well, so they named him the 13th president of the University of Wisconsin. And here's his inauguration in the field house. And so he was named the president in spring of 1958. He was not looking for the job. He was happy where he was, but the research committee had looked from coast to country, and they came back and realized Conrad Elvehjem would be the best candidate. And it was a difficult move because it was less pay, but more work that Conrad Elvehjem really didn't like. It would be a change in lifestyle for the entire family, extensive travel, lavish entertaining, dealing with the legislature and networking with potential big donors. So exactly the thing that Conrad would not like. But he felt a responsibility and an obligation to the university, so he accepted. And he was inaugurated on October 9th, 1958, 7,000 people in attendance. And his speech was 27 typewritten pages. Just a few less than mine. But I have larger font size. He asked for hills to climb and the strength to climb them. And he found the strength very early and he started climbing. And he was doing great things. And one of the worries of some of the humanities and social science people were that he was a hard science person that would focus solely on the hard sciences, but that was not the case. Elvehjem thought to have a great university, you have to have a well-balanced university. So he dedicated a lot of his time and efforts to supporting the humanities and the social sciences. And a lot of great things happened during this time. A lot of things were created. And so when Elvehjem took over as UW president, there were a few things he had to stop doing, including being on various boards and stop his research, his scientific research. And then one time he was going to this meeting with the National Food and Nutrition Board, but he was going to be late because of his recently announced plan that he was going to be the new president. And so he was going to be late coming to this conference. And George McGovern was the speaker. He was a congressman from South Dakota at the time, future senator and future candidate for president. And McGovern was starting his speech, and Elvehjem was going to be late, but he came in while McGovern was speaking, and all of a sudden the crowd erupts, and they all stand up and start applauding, giving Conrad Elvehjem a standing ovation. And George McGovern said, "Well, I can't compete with this," and so he sat down. But they were very fond of Conrad Elvehjem, and they said not so much for his new assignment as Wisconsin president, but for himself as a person. It was a remarkable show of affection and respect. And then when he was named president, a lot of articles were written, and one was by Don Henderson, the publisher of the State Journal. He wrote an article in Wisconsin Alumnus magazine, and he noted that Elvehjem acts quickly with his decisions, but is not afraid to delegate authority. He outlines the assignments to trusted colleagues and then lets them run with it. Anderson also said that Elvehjem has a pleasant exterior, and he enjoys a good joke and can spin an anecdote with skill, but rather quickly he's inclined to get down to business by remarking, "Let's get the show on the road." These are just some pictures of the inauguration weekend. You got to talk at the Camp Randall during the halftime. And this picture of them getting ready, preparing before their meal, inauguration meal. And on the left is Orrin and Lydia McConnell. And Lydia McConnell is Conrad Elvehjem's sister. And Elmer died earlier, so that's the only sibling that he had left. And the taller woman in the center is his daughter Peggy, and the woman next to Conrad is his wife Connie, and the young man on the right is his son Robert. Also invited to the party were Lorraine and Willard Egner, and Dorothy and Willard McConnell was a nephew, son of Lydia, and Lorraine was a niece. She was the daughter of Elmer, and some of the old timers here will remember Willie McConnell and Willard Egner as two of the first bus drivers in the McFarland schools. Another invited guest was Connie Elvehjem, Conrad's sister-in-law. The other two areas of controversy, and one was in 1960 where black students wanted to protest what was happening around the country, specifically down south. And it started with the food counter protests in Greensboro, North Carolina, and there were more of those all around the south. So in early March, the black students at UW wanted to protest. And the controversy was that the word got out that Conrad wouldn't let them march. That's true. He didn't want them to march. He had a scientific mind, and he thought a chaotic march up State Street wasn't the way to solve a problem. And so he asked the students not to march. And they said, okay, if they had their demonstration on the library mall. And it was reported in the State Journal that Elvehjem was against their cause, but that wasn't the truth. But then they had another article the next day following up and published Elvehjem's full praise of the students. And Elvehjem said, "I share your concern for the preservation and extension of human rights and applaud the decision of the Student Senate in favor of the intellectual rather than an emotional approach to protesting violations of such rights. Students have played an important and continuing role and efforts to eradicate discrimination from our own university community. Students have given an example in recent symposium of an excellent method of focusing opinion on long-range goals. Then he said something that got a lot of boos from the audience, and it's kind of a odd thing to say. But he said, students have initiated and aided in efforts to improve our reserve officers training program. Incidentally, there is some inconsistency in a stand which favors taking organized marching out of ROTC and proposing a disorganized march through the city, regardless of the importance of the cause. So there he's kind of showing this very focused scientific approach to things. But then he continued, I want to state my sympathy for those whose human rights are denied and my support to your protest against violations. I suggest education and a good example as the most powerful weapons for fighting these wrongs. And I hope that those gathered here can dedicate their efforts in this direction. And then a couple of months later, the students had another protest to commemorate the 6th anniversary of the 1954 Supreme Court ruling on Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. And so the Black students again wanted to protest. And this time they did march, but they listened to Elvehjem, I'm guessing, and they were very orderly. They walked single file from the campus to the state capitol on the sidewalk, not in the street. And Elvehjem met them up at the state capitol, and he said, you've done a fine job this afternoon, and I'm happy to be with you to support the cause you are for. The other controversy was the housing discrimination film, and came to a head in 1962. The film actually was done in the fall of 1961, where the filmmakers used hidden cameras and hidden microphones, and they had a black couple go to different properties to try to rent them, and that they saw the advertisement in the paper, and the white landlord would meet them at the door on the front lawn, and they would be told, you can't, it's not possible to live here. So it was showing housing discrimination very clearly. So they wanted to release this film, but the university had something to do with it. The filmmakers were from the university, and some of the money for the film came from the university. And when Elvehjem saw it, he said, I cannot release this film. It puts us in a bad position. It's a right of privacy for the landlords, but against the right of housing for the people who are looking for the place to stay. So he was torn, even though I don't think there was a law at that time for the right of privacy for the landlords, but Elvehjem was saying that it's a moral and ethical issue that he cannot allow that. Congressman Adam Clayton Powell from Harlem got involved and demanded the film be released. Elvehjem refused, but Elvehjem offered him a full transcript, not only of the film, but all of the outtakes. Elvehjem offered to redo the film using actors, but using the same transcript. But that wasn't, the filmmakers wouldn't abide by that. But in the end, it was not released. Word was that the university destroyed the film, burned it, but that was not the case. They put it in the archives, and it is available. I think you can find it on PBS, or Wisconsin PBS. But Adam Clayton Powell was against this, and the local NAACP was against it, because one of the people involved in the film was, I think, the vice president of the local chapter of the NAACP. But the American Civil Liberties Union was on the university side, as well as the Board of Regents, of course, and the Liberal Capital Times was on Elvehjem's side, as well as the UW Student Senate. But not everybody from the NAACP was against the UW stance. Those two quotes were written by a member of the NAACP, and she expressed how it was important that the UW not release the film. And so this is one controversy, but I don't think it really shows Elvehjem's discrimination or a racist opinion at all. That Madison had a race problem, a discrimination problem, and going back to the redlining in the 1930s and 40s, and then the racial covenants, the housing discrimination. And so Madison wasn't a model city like the Life magazine said it was in 1948. There were definite problems. These are just some other positive policy changes that Elvehjem that happened during Elvehjem's tenure. And as we learned, Elvehjem wasn't hands-on with everything. He delegated. And so he had other boards or committees working on these issues. But as president, everything had to go through Elvehjem, and Elvehjem had no problem with policy changes. And I just wanted to throw this in here because, well, as president, not everything was so serious. He had some lighter moments, and he was able to give he was the main speaker when Connie Elvehjem received the Rural Teacher of the Year award in Wisconsin. And the woman on the left is Connie Elvehjem, not Mrs. Conrad Elvehjem, but sister-in-law who married Elmer. And so they had this nice event for her. But if anybody, you remember the old grade school, it was held in the grade school cafeteria. And that was not very special. But that's where the president of the university came to honor his sister-in-law as being the teacher of the year, rural teacher of the year. Perfect with Conrad Elvehjem. During his tenure, he had budget fights with the legislature. The governor was not happy with him for his dealings with the legislature. And there was a melodrama at the medical school involving the dean and some other big egos there that took up a lot of Elvehjem's time. But for the most part, everybody appreciated what Conrad Elvehjem was doing. But Conrad had served as president for 4 years, but on the morning of July 27, 1962, he had a heart attack at his Bascom Hall office and died about an hour later at Madison General Hospital with his wife and son at his bedside. And a short time after his death, later that day or the next day, officials came to Mrs. Elvehjem and suggested that Conrad be laid in state at the Capitol. And Mrs. Elvehjem refused, saying, no, he wouldn't like that. On the death of Conrad Elvehjem states, such basic traditions of the university as academic freedom, enthusiasm for the pursuit of truth, concern for the individual student, and service of the whole state were not only fostered, but exemplified by him. He could make allowances for weaknesses he did not share. He even tried to understand the untidy desk, but never quite succeeded. Few men changed more than Elvehjem, yet few remained as constant. In his directness and honesty, in his unswerving devotion to high religious and moral standards, in his regard for the rights of others, in his complete dedication to learning and the University of Wisconsin as a home of learning, the undergraduate who became the president was the same man. Both humility and self-confidence were natural to him. He had an iron will which he used to control himself rather than others, a will which turned his natural impatience into an asset and drove his splendid brain from one accomplishment to another. For one of the constants of his character was the ability to grow. He could value what he did not himself savor, and the breadth of his sympathies and the understanding of the foibles of others and of himself, and the appreciation of those of less talent. He grew at each stage of his career. What had been the tolerance of the specialist was at the close of his life ripening into genuine catholicity of interest. There are a lot of accolades and special things. He really pushed hard for the art museum, and so after he died, even though it wasn't finished, construction yet. They named it after him in his honor. And after his death, the American Institute of Nutrition created the Conrad Elvehjem Award to honor those of its members who were remarkable for their distinguished public service. The Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation provided funds for an Elvehjem professorship in the life sciences, first held by Gobind Khorana, who 4 years later received the Nobel Prize. In 1960, Khorana accepted a position as co-director of the UW's Institute for Enzyme Research. So there's where that comes back to the center that Elvehjem started, the first in the nation. And he became professor of the biochemistry in 62 and was named professor of life sciences in 64. His enzyme research at the institute Elvehjem founded was a key element in receiving a Nobel Prize. And then after his death, the Elvehjem neighborhood was named after him. The Elvehjem School in Madison was named after him. And then Conrad Elvehjem School in McFarland was named after him. The school opened in the fall of 1968, but in February 1968, Mrs. Elvehjem was approached and asked if she wouldn't mind having the school named after her husband. And so she wrote a letter to the superintendent, Gordon Rodine, and she said, "My children and I are pleased to know his home community chose to honor him in this way. He was a man of great modesty and humility, so this would indeed surprise him. He attended a one-room school in McFarland and often expressed the thought that he had absorbed more in this kind of a learning environment. It is interesting to know this new facility will be a kind of a one-room school." The site of the new school, one is able to see both the farm where he was born and the home in McFarland where he lived after his father retired from farming. Close by are Creamy Road, where he walked so many times as a boy, as well as the railroad tracks, where he jumped the freight train to ride to Stoughton each day while attending high school there. So our family thanks the McFarland community for so honoring my husband from grateful hearts. And this is the dedication program. And in the program, there's a quote, and it says, "A bit of his philosophy might well inspire Elvehjem school pupils." And the quote is, "I, for one, believe that mankind's greatest moments are yet ahead, and I believe it is in the nature of every one of us to rejoice in what we might call the adventures of the human race." So that's Conrad Elvehjem's life. And I tried to show you the type of person he was, humble, quiet, modest, trustworthy, yet brilliant, direct, focused, and dedicated, an amazing person, an extraordinary scientist and administrator. Aspects of his life. Maybe I'm biased, but I have looked and I have looked and I have looked for over a year into Conrad Elvehjem's life, and I could not find any negative aspects about him. No significant shortcomings, no enemies. The only blemish is his signature on the Nicoma Covenant, and that's the only thing that I could find. But as the advisory committee, there's a lack of evidence of Elvehjem's intentions when he signed the document. They stated there's no known explanation for why he signed it. The complete rest of his life and being seemed to stand in total opposition in what that signature represents. But nevertheless, in the spring of 2025, after 57 years of having the name Conrad Elvehjem attached to the school, the McFarland School Board, at the recommendation of the advisory committee, voted 4-1 to remove the name Conrad Elvehjem from the school. The superintendent emphasized that the decision was not the condemnation of Conrad Elvehjem, nor an attempt to erase history, but they believe the name of a primary school should be one that unites and inspires. Rather, it was a reflection of the district's responsibility to ensure that every student, staff member, and family, regardless of their background, feels fully welcomed, respected, and valued in our schools and community. And so that's his life, but what's his legacy? Is it scientific research? Is it the type of person he was? His time at the university? But my fear is in the time of life that we're in, the society, you want quick information, you go to your phone and do a search and type in Conrad Elvehjem, you're going to find those words that I had on the third page. No one's going to delve deep into Conrad Elvehjem. So legacy is they took the name off the school and they labeled them a racist. And that's not good. And so I'm asking you, what do you think is his legacy? And with that, there's my sources.
Obviously, he signed it. He knows he signed it. Has anyone ever asked him why he signed it?
No, because he died in 1962, and up until then, nobody probably knew. John. Widespread. And I'm sure some of you saw the display that was in the library all of February on racial covenants and redlining. And it was a dark period in the country's history that Supreme Court allowed it. And everybody said it was okay, but it was just another example of systemic racism in our country. And going all the way up, we can find evidence of it today. So it was unfortunate, and we just don't know what Conrad Elvehjem was thinking when he signed it. But hopefully, his legacy will be bigger than what we might be afraid of. Yes. The name itself is still on the school, but all the official documents reflected as McFarland Primary School. Madison School District is also considering removing Elvehjem's name from their school. It's an unfortunate thing because statement that the advisory committee and school board said they wanted the school name that would inspire people, inspire students, inspire teachers, but I said at the very start, I don't think there's anybody more inspiring in this community who's done more than Conrad Elvehjem. But he had that one signature on that document that still, we don't know why he signed it, but it's there. And it's possibility. Had been talking about not allowing blacks to live in Tacoma since 1928. I think it was at a meeting that they talked about it that early, but didn't get around to putting it onto an amendment for their covenant until 1931. Yeah, Stuart Levitan, when he wrote his book, did some digging because he lived in Tacoma, and I think on his property deed, it had that. And so he went searching for it and he found it and put it in his book. And because, well, not much, no, but he did point out Conrad Elvehjem signed it because Conrad Elvehjem was the biggest name on that list. But in 1931, Conrad Elvehjem wasn't a big name. He was an associate professor, and no one knew what he was doing except the people in the biochemistry department. And then after that, he became well known. And then Stuart Levitan also liked to point out that Oscar Rennebaum did not sign it, and almost showing that, yeah, Oscar Rennebaum knew enough not to sign it, but Conrad Elvehjem thought, oh, I don't want black, so I'll sign it. That wasn't the case because they didn't need every person signing it. And so they didn't go to Oscar Rennebaum's house. He was a big shot at the time, and he was going to be governor. And misleading when he pointed out that Oscar Rennebaum didn't sign it, but Conrad Elvehjem did. That's the reason why it came to light, because of Stuart Levitan's books. Pardon me? He probably wasn't. No, I'm sure they didn't go to his house because, like, I don't know. The other questions or comments? Yeah, Jane.
We have so much relevance for it, but yeah, many of them, just like.
So James Madison High School was changed because of that. And other. Here's your attention, and I'm sorry that I had a race. Oh yeah, and Miss Sarah's reminding me, I have some free gifts in the back for your attention. Pardon me? And Conrad Elvehjem is on July 27th page. Bruce.
Was it 2 days ago? Nope.
Yeah.
And he never accepted. He refused.
Yeah, right.
That's in that calendar. You guys.
Oh, yeah, that's in there too.
2 days ago.
Yeah, okay. And with Easter coming up, if you want to put them in an Easter basket, you can. That would be a great Easter bunny gift. No. Go ahead. Good stuff. Thanks.